Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts, America's Still Beautiful podcast, a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts, America's Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Emily Ferrier, here to bring you some uplifting stories in these trying times. For our first story, this 42-year-old Zamboni driver is being hailed as a hockey hero after he stepped in a visiting team's emergency goalie and helped them win the game. David Ayres, who's the Zamboni driver for the Toronto Maple Leafs, was tapped in to play against his home team for the Carolina Hurricanes after both of their goalies were injured on the ice during the weekend's game. Ayres then went on to block 8 of the 10 shots that were made against him during the remaining 30 minutes of the game, which helped the Hurricanes secure a 6-3 victory. Although Ayres is a designated backup goalie, this was actually the first time that he was ever forced to play, making it his first ever NHL game. When reporters asked him, what will he remember from the experience? He simply said, "These guys, how great they were to me, how fun. The crowd in Toronto is unreal. Even though I was on the other team, they were so receptive and so awesome. Every time I made a save, I could hear them cheering for me." Since Ayres underwent a kidney transplant 15 years ago, he never believed that he would play hockey again. Now, however, the Hurricanes are selling official Ayres jerseys with a portion of the proceeds being donated to kidney transplant charity of his choice. According to the NHL, Ayres' weekend performance also made him the second oldest hockey player to make their professional debut in NHL, following 43-year-old Lester Patrick's game in 1927. Having been to a few of the games in Toronto myself, I can tell you that absolutely they are the most supportive crowd I have ever experienced at a sporting event. So this actually doesn't surprise me that they were supporting him even though he was playing for the opposite team. This must have been just an unreal adventure for him to be able to play in the NHL, having been a Zamboni driver and being on the sidelines for so long and being a backup goalie for so long. And then especially after having a kidney transplant and, not knowing what his future would hold. And I bet when he was getting a kidney transplant, or even when he was learning to drive the Zamboni, he probably never even thought that there was any chance that he would ever be actually playing in an NHL game. So that's pretty incredible. It's too bad that he was playing against the Toronto Maple Leafs. I'm sure it would have been much more exciting for him to play for the home team, but it's very exciting that he did get his chance. Wow, yeah, really, really incredible story. I really liked this one. And it just goes to show you, that you never know. You never know what's going to happen in your future. So it's pretty cool. Quite an against the odds story. And another against the odds story that I found, Teresa Veroline, just completed the New York City Marathon without the use of her legs or a wheelchair. Instead, Verline became not just the first ever paralyzed American to finish the famous NYC event, but the first veteran in the world to complete it with an exoskeleton. Words cannot express the feelings I had crossing the finish line, Verline said in a press release. This has been a dream of mine, and I hope I can serve as an inspiration to others that you too can achieve what it seems like the impossible, especially all of the disabled children I met across the country. Happy-footed Verline completed her first 10-mile stretch of the marathon, which runs through each of the 5 boroughs of New York City, over the course of 3 days under the supervision of the New York Roadrunners, the organization of the marathon. Walking 10 miles of the 26.2 on November 1st, another 10 miles on the 2nd, she knocked out the last 6.2 on the day of the actual marathon. She crossed the finish line on November the 3rd at 6:35 p.m. The Rewalk 5.0 exoskeleton suit is designed to help paraplegics move around with the help of crutches for balance, and they couldn't have asked for a better spokesperson than Verline. The U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs established a natural procedurement policy for retired staff members who are eligible to receive one of the life-changing devices. A 65-year-old Verline, who became paralyzed in 2011, was the first veteran to receive a device following FDA clearance. She's traveled the world to speak about the impact of the exoskeleton and has had on her own life and health. We are incredibly proud of her, her achievement at the marathon, and her efforts to help others with a disability are inspirations to all of us, said Andy Dolan, Rewalk's Vice President of Marketing. He told this to CNET in an email exchange. Therapeutic exoskeletons are beginning to attract a lot of research dollars, with robotic companies like Rewalk, Exobionics, Rex Bionics, and SuitX all offering models to help people with spinal cord injuries to get moving again. And not only moving again, but running marathons. I don't think that she would have thought this possible just a few years ago. It's really incredible the advancements that science is making for people with different abilities or people that have had their mobility taken away in an accident. Patients with spinal cord injuries often require far more routine cares than others. They suffer from an increased risk of cardiovascular disease, urinary tract infections, bone density loss, chronic pain, and pressure ulcers. Just being able to stand up and walk around, however, unsteady, increases blood circulation and oxygen intake, normalizes and improves ventricular function, and can fortify cardiovascular health. So not only would it improve their abilities to move around, but it would improve their overall health. So this is a huge feat in science advancement and in an increase in quality of life. So congratulations to Verline for completing the New York City Marathon. That's pretty incredible. So these against the odds stories show that no matter who you are, no matter where you come from, you can do so much more than people seem to think. When we come back, we have some stories from two different Londons, one in England and one in Ontario, Canada. So that's when we returned from the break.
The GSMC Life and Happiness podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about people beating the odds. And now, we're going to go from Europe to America. And first, in Europe. Most workplaces do not have the time or resources to accommodate employees with dementia, but this grocery store has received heaps of praise for going above and beyond for one of their 61-year-old workers. Mrs. Salomon had only been working at Sainsbury's for a year when she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. Prior to the diagnosis, she'd been forced to leave her job as a bookkeeper because it was becoming increasingly disorganized. After quitting her bookkeeping career in 2012, Mrs. Salomon applied for the job as picker at Sainsbury's supermarket in Kenton, North London. The job, which simply involved putting together online orders for customer pickups at the store, was easier for Miss Salomon. But as the disease progressed, the store's management began to suspect her medical condition. Upon being informed of her diagnosis, however, the Sainsbury's staffers started doing everything in their power to make sure that Mrs. Salomon felt comfortable and valued. For context, Sainsbury's has seen my mom deteriorate to the point of every day for the past year or so, she's gone into the store confused, as if she's never been there before, said Doreen, Mrs. Salomon's son. Doran, sorry. They've always stood by her, going above and beyond to make sure that she's happy and valued. For the next 4 years, Sainsbury's did everything to keep Mrs. Salomon on the team. They changed her hours. They stayed in constant contact with her family so they could provide updates on her condition at work, and they regularly retrained her. They kept her coworkers informed of her condition. When the disease progressed to a more debilitating state, Sainsbury's even created an entirely new job for her as a tote box cleaner. To my mom, cleaning the tote boxes became the most important job in the world. If she didn't do it, the store would fall apart. The sense of self-worth and pride had helped her with aspects of her Alzheimer's, such as giving her something to talk about in social situations. In 2017, Mrs. Salomon's received a medical assessment that said that her Alzheimer's had progressed to an advanced stage, and she was declared unemployable. Again, Sainsbury's kept her on the team. There have been so many times that Sainsbury's could have let her go. Instead, every time my dad was called in for a meeting, fearing the worst, it was because they'd noticed a decline, were concerned about her, and wanted to know what more they could do to help. 6 months ago, Mrs. Salomon's employment finally came to an end, and though it was an emotional departure, she was relieved. Senior management acted with compassion and handled everything with class and dignity. They've been a fabulous employer, and more than that, on a human level, the people working in Kenton's store have shown sensitivity, kindness, and care. Several months after, Doran published the heartwarming story on his Twitter account, and he said that dozens of UK Sainsbury's stores have held weekend fundraisers for Alzheimer's awareness in Mrs. Solomon's honor. In another story from a different London, 3 years ago, Ron Robert was shocked and distressed over his Alzheimer's diagnosis, but instead of letting the disease get better of him, he inspired a brand new chapter of his life. As a means of keeping his mind sharp, the 81-year-old started taking classes at King's University College in London, Ontario. Enrolling in the school has not only helped the Canadian senior stay engaged, it's also helping to inspire his fellow dementia patients and raise awareness for what it's like to live in the disease. Too many people, they get diagnosed with something like Alzheimer's, and they think somehow it's the end, Robert told CTV News. Well, it's not an end. It's actually a new beginning. It's something you've got to work at. And actually, it's a good thing, because I was getting quite bored and being retired. So this is all a new challenge for me. Thus far, Robert says that his classes in political science and disability studies have been a tremendous help to his mental health. I feel really good, he said. This short-term memory is terrible. Long-term memory is improved. I feel better mentally. And I think that's a big, important part too. You got to be upbeat. Though his fellow students are young enough to be his grandchildren, they've been especially supportive of Robert's mission. On a few occasions that Robert becomes disoriented in the university's facilities, students are always quick to approach him and offer their assistance. Robert's determination has made him the face of Yes, I Live with Dementia campaign, an initiative that was created by the Alzheimer's Society of Canada as a means of combating the stigma and misconceptions surrounding the neurodegenerative disease. The senior hopes to continue his education until he can eventually graduate from the school alongside his peers. But until then, he has other aspirations for his fellow dementia sufferers. I'm hoping I'm the beginning of a wave. I hope that all these people are out there listening, have given up on Alzheimer's, and will just get off their butts and join me out there. These stories were particularly touching to me. The idea of people being around these people with these disorders and supporting them and rallying together and doing everything that they can to help, as well as showing new hope for something that we consider to be a completely debilitating disease, that there is potential, for the mind to continue to work and advance as these neurodegenerative diseases progress, and the idea of like a new life, really, for a person suffering from these things. So, and I also quite liked that it was from the two different Londons, that we went from Europe and came back to the Americas, to Canada. And it really just tied together quite nicely, seeing that it is across the world and it is in different parts of our society that these things are happening. So it's lovely. If you guys have any other stories like that, I would love to hear them. So when we return from our break this time, we are going to be talking about some very sweet stories about pets, and they're also about the elderly in a way. They're about elderly pets. So we'll be talking about that when we come back from our break. So stay tuned for that, and don't go anywhere. Let's wait this one out. I'll see you soon.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about some stories about people with Alzheimer's, and now this 16-year-old dog may be blind and deaf, but she still managed to survive being carried off by a hawk last week. Portia, the toy poodle, was snatched up by a bird of prey as she was sitting up on her porch in Whitehall, Pennsylvania. Portia's owner, Deborah Falcone, was frantic with worry over her dog's disappearance. She spent hours searching the surrounding area, but to no avail. While the evening temperatures fell below freezing, she feared the worst. Just 28 hours after Portia was dognapped, however, Falcone was shocked to receive a call from a local veterinary clinic saying that they had the senior pup in their care. I said, "That's impossible. She could not have survived 28 hours in the bitter cold weather and negative 10 degrees. Or in the 10-degree weather, sorry," Falcone told reporters. "She's blind. She's deaf. She's 16 years old. I went down there, and sure enough, there's the dog." As it turns out, a neighbor had found Portia after the hawk had dropped her into a nearby yard just 4 blocks away from Falcone's house. Although the disabled dog was relatively lethargic in the clinic's heating tank following her harrowing ordeal, she was in surprisingly good health. "How she got away," said Falcone, "I have no idea. How she survived, I'll never know. But I know one thing. By the grace of God, this dog is still alive." Now, I think this is really following in our theme with the against the odds today. Because, first of all, this is a very elderly dog. She's already beating the odds just by living into this old age. But being snatched up by a bird of prey, being taken away, that a bird of prey, obviously, they're not looking to make friends, and then falling out of their talons, I can only assume, and then surviving that, and then also surviving being outside in the bitter cold at her age. It's all pretty incredible, if you ask me. So we're going to keep going with this against the odds theme that we've been talking about pretty well all episode. So more against the odds story. A beloved border collie has miraculously been reunited with her owners, who spent 57 days searching for her in the rural region of Montana. Carol King, not that Carol King, and her husband Vern had traveled all the way to Kalispell from their home in Spokane, Washington, so they could enjoy a relaxing 4-day getaway in the sprawling mountain wilderness. However, their vacation turned into a harrowing search and rescue mission after they returned to their dog-friendly hotel on July 20th, only to find that their 7-year-old border collie named Katie had disappeared from their room. The Kings immediately canceled their return trip so they could stay in Kalispell and search for Kate. For several weeks, they would stay out until 4 a.m. calling her name. They distributed hundreds of flyers throughout the community. They published her picture on social media channels and Facebook groups. Concerned local citizens helped them comb the countryside, but they still couldn't find Katie. After a few weeks with no success, they bought motion-triggered cameras and animal cage traps that were baited with Katie's favorite food. They even bought night vision goggles after one of their newly made friends in Kalispell suggested that Katie may be moving around at night, but still no luck. At one point, Carol traveled back home to Spokane so she could go back to her job as a mail carrier. But when they denied her request to take additional time off to keep searching, she quit. Katie was just more important to me, Mrs. King told the New York Times. I just said, I'll finish this week, then that's it. Upon returning to Kalispell one more time, Vern took her place at their home in Washington so he could continue looking after all their pets. Thankfully, a local family in Montana had offered to host them until they found their dog, and Carol continued the search with the help of a friendly mountain community. By the time September rolled on, Carol began to lose hope. She missed her home, her husband, her pets. But Vern and the Kalispell residents encouraged her to continue looking for just one more week. She then received a call from a resident who said that he'd seen a border collie in his yard. Carol and her friend visited the property but found nothing until they ran into a pair of hikers who pointed out a border collie that had been resting under a nearby tree. When Carol called Katie's name, the dog ran bounding into her arms. All I could think about was, I'm done. I got her, Carol told the Times. I was crying. I was holding on to her, wrapped up in a bear hug. I couldn't get her in the car fast enough to close her in so I wouldn't lose her again. Though Katie had lost 15 pounds from her stint in the wild, she was in relatively good health, and she was overwhelmed with joy when she was finally reunited with Vern back in Washington. Carol now hopes that their story will inspire other pet owners to never give up on their missing animals. Never give up. That is a massive theme of today. Never to give up. You can never give up on things if they're really important to you, because you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know when something could completely turn around and change for the better, when something could finally work out like it never did before. So I think I'm encouraging you today to listen to these stories, and I hope that they inspire you. If there's something you were thinking about giving up on, I hope that this has maybe changed your mind. When we come back from the break, we are going to be talking about another positive thing that has come out of the Australian bushfire relief. And this is actually maybe something you're not expecting to have come out of it. So we're going to talk about that when we return. So don't go anywhere.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now. Don't bother. What's hot on Netflix and everything in between. That's gsmcpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back. Today we're talking all about against the odds, and the Australian bushfires is certainly one of those stories. It seemed so grim for so long. It seemed like it was never going to end, like we would never be able to control it. And yet, somehow, the flames have all been extinguished, and Australia is on its way to mending. Since the bushfires and flooding across southern Australia have left dozens of communities without power, several tech companies have begun installing solar panels and electric grids with astonishing speed, thanks to a philanthropist couple, Mike and Annie Cannon-Brooks, who have donated $12 million towards the creation of the Resilient Energy Collective, a coalition dedicated to setting up sustainable microgrids across Australia. The collective, which utilizes electrical batteries from Tesla and solar systems from 5B, have already developed 2 clean energy grids for rural sites in New South Wales and Victoria. Prior to their installation, firefighters and locals have been depending on diesel generators for electricity during the bushfire season. In addition to these generators being particularly costly and high maintenance, they also emit large amounts of pollutants. The collective is now working with energy providers across the country to prioritize 100 more sites for microgrid installation. The initiative is similar to how Tesla use solar-powered grids to restore electricity across Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria back in 2017. Now, Mr. Cannon-Brooks, who is also the co-founder and CEO of Atlassian Tech Company, says that the coalition has been installing their own microgrids in as little as 2 days. In 3 weeks, we've come together, found the technology, adapted it, and put it on trucks. Right now, it's operating and generating electricity, Cannon-Brooks told Eco Generation in a statement. That's what this collective is all about, getting the best possible tech and the best ingenuity together to solve a massive problem in days, not months or years. So that's hugely important and going to be hugely healing for Australia. And in other tech news, Denmark, with a landscape as flat as a pancake, may be a new whimsical destination for skiing, thanks to a Copenhagen new power plant. Yeah. Last weekend, in Copenhagen, an 8-year dream was realized when the first paying skiers took their runs down a 1/3 mile course, wrapping around what is possibly the greenest power plant in the world. The plant is so clean and so safe the designers were able to turn its building mass into a new hub for social life. A hybrid between a building and a landscape. The huge glass and mirrored structure contains planters covering the facade in a checkerboard pattern that might one day give the illusion of a green mountain from every direction. Copenhill, as it's called, features ski lifts on the outside and also a glass elevator for seeing the inner workings of how the city's trash is transformed into both electricity and heating for more than 200,000 homes. The waste-to-power plant itself opened in 2017 under the name Amager Bæk for the island in Copenhagen and Bæk is the Danish word for hill. Bjarke Ingels is the architect whose company, Bjarke Ingels Group, came up with the idea 8 years ago of designing a power plant structure that would incorporate mountain sports into its very nature. It's the cleanest waste-to-energy power plant in the world. It's a crystal clear example of hedonistic sustainability, a phrase he coined because a sustainable city is not only better for the environment, it's also more enjoyable for the lives of its citizens. Ingels says 97% of residents get their heating as a byproduct of energy production from an integrated system, where the electricity, heating, and waste disposal are all combined into a single process. He believes that it's also becoming a beacon into what others can look and say, if Copenhagen can do it, why can't we? There are no hills on this island city, but now residents can ski and snowboard locally while enjoying the best views ever seen on the harbor. Another thing missing here is snow cover throughout the winter. So designers installed a specially coated plastic grass that provides the perfect friction for downhill winter sports. In a country where 600,000 skiers always had to travel to their practice, carving their turns to be able to finally ski in their backyard all year round, as one skier said, extraordinary. Visitors can relax in the restaurant and bar at the highest point of the building, or meander on the steep hiking and running trails. It even features the tallest climbing wall in the world, 270 feet high to be exact, with overhangs and ledges of white like an icy mountain. The $660 million power plant will process up to 440,000 tons of waste each year using furnaces, turbines, and steam. The electricity it produces can heat 160,000 homes and provide electrical power to another 60,000. And though these numbers are impressive, the 24-hour operation of the entire facility can reportedly be handled by just 2 engineers. The developers hope to see 300,000 visitors each year enjoying the multi-purpose experience of Copenhill, while the ski scope costs $22 an hour or $366 for a full season pass. Professional skier Nikolai Vang says, "I've been skiing for 35 years and was very surprised and pleased that the coating had the perfect friction. I feared that one would either get too much or too little slip, but the coating is perfect for all levels." Meanwhile, the city is one step closer to the ambitious goal of becoming the world's first carbon-neutral city by 2025. So this is pretty exciting for them. When we come back to Cornell University for a new species of soil bacteria.
pets bring such joy to our lives, and the GSMC Pets podcast is here to share in that joy. We'll tell stories of pets finding their forever homes, acting in unexpected ways, being helpful, or just being silly. Whether you love dogs, cats, llamas, reptiles, fish, or you've never met an animal you didn't like, the GSMC Pets podcast is for you.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about some tech initiatives to save the environment as well as clean up after the Australian bushfires. And now, researchers from Cornell University have found a new species of soil bacteria that is particularly adept at breaking down organic matter, including the cancer-causing chemicals that are released when coal, gas, oil, and refuse are burning. The newly discovered Medentia bacteria was named after Jean Madison, the Cornell microbiology professor who first started the research and discovered the microbiome. He died in 2017 before he could confirm the discovery. All plants and animals, including humans, host a collection of friendly bacteria that help us to digest food and fight infection. The bacteria living in soils not only help plants grow, cope with stress, and fight off pests, they're also essential to understanding climate change. The bacteria belonging to the genus Parabicarla, which is known for their ability to degrade aromatic compounds and in some species, the capacity to form root nodules that fix atmospheric nitrogen. The species name, Medencina, reflects the legacy of Madsen's work in the field of environmental microbiology. Madsen's research focused on biodegradation, the role microbes play in breaking down pollutants in contaminated soils, with a special focus on organic pollutants called polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. His work was groundbreaking in providing natural tools to address hazardous waste in areas where contaminated soils can't easily be dug up and removed. Microbiomes have been here since life began, almost 4 billion years. They created the system that we live in, and they sustain it, says Dan Buckley, professor of microbiology, the section of soil and crop sciences at the School of Integrative Plant Science. We may not see them, but they're running the show. Buckley and 5 other Cornell researchers, along with colleagues from Lycoming College, describe the new bacterium in a paper published this month entitled The International Journal of Science and Systematic Evolutionary Microbiology. Jean was a humble man and a great scientist. I'm so happy to see his legacy live on this way, said Esther Engert, professor and chair of the Department of Microbiology. It's so apt that a bacterium with these traits would be named after this remarkable environmental microbiologist. I think Jean must be smiling. The work started in a Cornell experimental forest on Turkey Hill, a natural area stewarded by Cornell Botanical Gardens. Madsen isolated the new bacteria from the forest soil. Buckley's team brought the project to completion. The first step was sequencing the bacteria's ribosome RNA genes, which provided genetic evidence that Medicinina was a unique species. In studying the new bacteria, the research noticed that it especially was adept at breaking down aromatic hydrocarbons, which make up lignin, a major component of plant biomass and soil organic matter. Aromatic hydrocarbons are also found in toxic PAH pollution. This means that the newly identified bacteria could be a candidate for biodegradation research and an important player in the soil carbon cycle. Buckley's lab focused on the bacterium's role in the carbon cycle, the natural cycling of carbon through Earth's atmosphere, which scientists say has been thrown out of whack by excess human carbon emissions. We know remarkably little about how soil bacteria operate, said Buckley. Soils, every year, process about 7 times more carbon than all of the human emissions from cars, power plants, heating units, and other things all over the world. Just in their natural work of decomposting plant material, because it's such a large amount of carbon going through the soil, small changes in how we manage soil can make a big impact on climate change. In the case of Medicinina, Buckley's lab wants to learn more about the symbiotic relationship between bacteria and forest trees. Initial research suggests that trees feed carbon to the bacteria and then turn the bacteria degrade soil organic matter, thereby releasing nutrients such as nitrogen and phosphorus for the trees. Understanding how bacteria break down carbon in soil could actually hold the key to sustainability of soil and the ability to predict the future of the global climate. The research was supported by the USDA National Institute of Food and Agriculture through the McIntyre Stennis Grant. So just this simple thing of analyzing soil could actually change the future for us, could change the way that we study carbon emissions, and could help us cut down on them for the future. Who would have thought that just dirt could be the key to saving our planet? It's pretty incredible, I think. So that's it for our environmental news. Another against the odds story, really, if you're thinking about, the odds of studying something as simple as soil being able to change the world. So when we return from our break, we're going to talk about the greatest news from today's date over the history of time. So we'll talk about that when we return from our break.
The GSMC Life and Happiness podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back. Today we've been talking all about against the odds. Stories from all over the world, but especially America, focused in people going up against stereotypes, odds, expectations, and beating them, knocking them down, knocking them out of the park. Now, historically, that's been true of many of these things today. So we're going to talk about the good news in history on today's date, which is February the 26th. 50 years ago today, National Public Radio was founded in the U.S., established by an act of Congress as a non-profit media network. So producers can focus on creating quality news and entertainment rather than making money. Publicity and privately funded through universities, memberships, and donations, NPR serves 1,000 public radio stations today. Broadcaster Susan Stamberg was the first woman to anchor a nightly news program in America, co-hosting All Things Considered, one of the most popular radio programs in the country. That was in 1970 on today's date. So the starting of news on the air, like in such a way, trying to make it quality and entertainment rather than for money. Some more good news on today's date in history. The Grand Teton National Park was created on today's date in 1929. So that is 91 years ago. Singer-songwriter Michael Bolton, who sold more than 75 million records, including 2 #1 pop ballads, How Am I Supposed to Live Without You, and 8 albums on the top charts, Time, Love, and Tenderness, was born in Connecticut on today's date in 1953. The United Nations proclaimed the vernal equinox as Earth Day in 1971 on today's date. In 1987, on today's date, the Church of England voted for the ordination of women priests on today's date in 1997. Free Nicaraguan elections toppled the Sandinistas in 1990. And on today's date in 1991, Tim Berners-Lee introduced the first world's web browser. It was today in 1991. Kuwait was liberated by 30 Gulf War allied countries after 208 days of Iraqi occupation, as Saddam Hussein withdrew his troops in 1991 on today's date. On today's date in 2004, the U.S. lifted a 23-year ban on travel to Libya. And today's date in 2005, Egypt's President Mubarak ordered a multi-candidate election to be legal. And on this date, in 1932, Johnny Cash was born. The American singer-songwriter, guitarist, and author was widely considered one of the most influential musicians of the 20th century and one of the best-selling music artists of all time, having sold more than 90 million records worldwide. Although primarily he's remembered as a country music icon, his genre-spanning songs embraced rock and roll, rockabilly, blues, folk, and gospel. The crossover appeal won Cash a rare honor multiple inductions to country music, rock and roll, and gospel music halls of fame. Known for his calm, deep bass baritone voice, his rebelliousness, and free prison concerts, this trademark look later earned him the nickname the Man in Black. He traditionally began his concerts with the simple, "Hello, I'm Johnny Cash," and featured his signature songs, "I Walk the Line," "Folsom Prison Blues," "Ring of Fire," and of course, "A Boy Named Sue." On this date in 1919, of course, the Grand Canyon was proclaimed a national park by the U.S. Congress. So just over 100 years. The steep-sided, mile-deep canyon, carved by the Colorado River in Arizona, was first visited in 1903 by President Theodore Roosevelt, who became a major proponent of preservation. Opponents of such land and morning claim holders blocked the efforts for 11 years, but the Grand Canyon, 277 miles long and 18 miles wide, was finally established as the 17th U.S. national park. For 1,200 years, the area has been continuously inhabited by the Native American Pueblo people, who consider this a holy site. And on this day in 1916, Jackie Gleason, the comedian, actor, and musician, whose style and characters grew out of his childhood home in Brooklyn, was born. He's known for his brash physical comedy style, exemplified by his character Ralph Cramden in the beloved television series. He was 8 when his father left the family and 19 when his mother died. But soon, he was earning enough money in pool halls and on stage as an entertainer. He self-produced a TV variety show, The Jackie Gleason Show, and earned the second highest ratings in America from 1954 to 1955. Among his notable film roles were Minnesota Fats and the Academy Award-winning 1961 drama The Hustler, and Buford T. Justice in the Smokey and the Bandit series. Gleason was an amateur musician who produced more than a dozen romantic, best-selling mood music LPs. The bandleader for several of them, Bobby Hackett, said, "Jackie knows a lot more about music than people give him credit for. I've seen him conduct a 60-piece orchestra and detect a discordant note in the brass section. He'd immediately stop the music and locate the wrong note. It always amazed the professional musicians that a guy who did technically not know one note for another could tell that, and he was never wrong." Gleason's albums are still available and have been re-released on compact discs. So that's it for our news today. Thank you for listening to the GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'd like to ask you to please remember to subscribe to the show and write us a nice review. And please rate the episode. That actually really helps us when you upvote us. Also, if you can, please follow us on Facebook, on Twitter, and of course, on Instagram. So that's it for today. And thank you again for listening. And have yourselves a great night. I'll speak to you soon.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts, America's Still Beautiful podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows. From the GSMC Podcast Network, from social media news to marketing news, and even weird news, the GSMC Podcast Network has you covered. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts, America's Still Beautiful podcast.